In this video I'll show you how to put back in a new alternator for a VQ20DE Nissan engine. I've already pulled the old one out. It's just a matter of putting the new one back in. Taking the old one out is pretty much the same process as putting the new one back in, but in reverse. And it pays to get a new belt while you're in there. So I've just pulled the old one out. First step is to release the tensioner here, tensioner bolt. That will loosen the belt, and then you should be able to pop the belt straight off the pulley, all the pulleys. And then next step would be to drop out the air compressor motor. So once you get the belt off, you'd pull out the 4 bolts, 1, 2, 3, 4. As you can see, 2 more at the top. Where is it? There's one of them right there. And there's one of them right there. They're all the same bolt. So here's the 4 bolts that come out of the air compressor or air conditioning compressor. 1, 2, 3, 4. And the 5th one will be for the old alternator, which you'd pull out after you've removed the compressor, because the compressor will give you more, well, removing the compressor will give you a lot more space to get in there and undo the bolts on the alternator. So the AC compressor motor should be removed, and I think it has to be removed to get access to the bolts for the old alternator. It definitely pays to unplug these 2 plugs here, which are located towards the top of the car, and they plug in just to this loom from behind the headlight here to here, which need to be unplugged so that you don't rip the harness out. So to remove the AC compressor from under the car, take the 4 bolts out as I suggested earlier, and then drop it from the mounts and try and just push it away to the side so that you can get access to the alternator. It does swing around a bit. I've used just some wire to tie it to the side here. First thing to do is just to move the alternator out of the way so that you can pull out or put back in, which is the same in reverse if you're reassembling it, the new alternator motor. So that would just go up here. And have your sliding bolt ready, because that will just slide in from the rear of the alternator. It'll slot in and then through to the front, which is on a nut. So one of the pins will need to be removed from the bottom of the alternator. It's a longer pin. Don't get it mixed up with the 4 shorter pins that are used on the AC compressor, this one over here. Use the longer one that came out of it, and that will slide in from the back of the alternator towards the front, and then this little nut here will go on the front of the alternator, and you'll screw these 2 together. I don't know if you can see that, but you can screw these 2 together, and that will tighten up this part of the assembly here, which is the sliding, is where the sliding bolt goes through. So if you want to undo or put back the alternator, make sure you're pulling out the longer pin or putting back in I should say, the longer pin into the assembly. So this will go back in this way, and on the other side will be the nut. So this will automatically screw into that and hold, and that will attach the bottom of your alternator to the car up in here. So I'll show you that in a moment, this part here. Okay, so we're back onto the car again, and we'll put the alternator up under here where we got the old one from, and it should line up with these two slots. So there's one up here on the side, and there's one on the back of the alternator. Get your rod ready, your number 14 bolt, and slide it from the back of the alternator, so this way around. So as you can see, I've put the new bolt in from the back side, from the side, pushed it through into the front, and now all you have to do is put the nut back on. So that's this one here, and make sure it's in the right orientation. So the top will be up, and just rotate this side so that it would become tight again. So once you get the alternator up there where it came from, just stick the floating nut, this one here, up in there like that, so that you can screw the number 14 bolt in from this side. This is the longer bolt, remember, and I find that a socket is the easiest option in this tight space. Once you do that up, get onto the top where you'll do the top bolt up, which we'll see in a moment. Cool, so once you get the bottom bolt in and screw it into this nut, as you can see there on the floating nut, get your top bolt ready. This is a number 12. You'll need like a number 12 socket, and just stick it in this hole over here and tighten it up. So once you've finished tightening up this top bolt, we'll get down to the bottom AC compressor, and we'll reinstall that. So once you get the top bolt in, put the compressor back where you got it from, which is up on these mounts. It should sit there while you get the two upper and two lower bolts, exactly the same size, number 14s, and just get them all lined up before you tighten them all down equally and cross pattern. Cool, so now just tighten up the bolts. Let's get them all sort of a bit tight first, and then just tighten them up fully. Once they're all tight, get the plug and just pass it back up through to the top and plug it back in. So that now. The next step is putting the new belt back in, and then afterwards we'll put the pulley in, which goes up in here. Make sure you put the new belt on, not the old belt. So now go up here from the engine, on the AC compressor that we just put in, and then up here on the alternator pulley. Now, next step is to install this pulley, which goes up here, tensioner pulley. So this is the tensioner pulley. Make sure you put it back on the same way you took it off. So the first thing to do is to put back on the spacer. So this will go right down on there, on that. There we go, on that bolt, which is just floating there. Make sure you fully loosen off the tensioner adjuster first, so that it can come all the way up. So put that on now. It's a bit of a tight squeeze. Try not to drop it. Cool. And the next step will be to install the pulley itself. So that will go on like that. And then after that, install the spacer. I'm not sure if this is factory because somebody's been in here before, but this one had a spacer after the bearing here, and then the cover which goes over that, and then on top of that goes the nut. So make sure that's up nice and tight. Doesn't hurt to put some Loctite in there, make sure it doesn't come free. This is just medium thread locker. It's not going to tighten it up too much, and it's removable, so if something does go wrong, like you need the belt changed or alternator changed again, it won't be too difficult to get off. So we'll just do that right now. Cool, so we've got the spacer in there, then we've got the pulley just being put in, and now I'm about to install the second washer, which I guess is a spacer, because it may have had a new bearing put in, and then of course the nut. So that was a bit hard to get on. It took me about 5 minutes to get that all together, but a bit of grease to stick it all together, and then put the nut on helps a bit. Make sure you do it up tight enough so that it doesn't come loose. After that, I had a screwdriver in the back of there just to hold the bolt in a bit further, stopped it from popping back in, stopped it from sliding back too far. Makes it easier to get the nut on. Once you're done, tighten it up on this tensioner here. Make sure the belts are nice and tight, and then we'll be chucking the the positive terminal back onto the alternator over here, and plug it in the rest of the plugs from this loom, which we had unplugged earlier. Make sure when you make sure that when you connect this all back up, that the battery is disconnected, so that you don't get any arcing from this positive to, say, ground. So it turns out that you don't actually need to fully take this pulley off to get the belt off. You just need to loosen this nut so that you can adjust the pulley tensioner up and down with this number 14, and to do that, so just loosening that nut will allow you to adjust this tensioner up and down. You don't actually have to take the pulley fully off to get the belt off. You only have to loosen the nut. Cool, so we're back under the car with the alternator on the top right in place, and the belt back on. The idler pulley nut is now tight because I've just tensioned it up, so make sure you loosen the nut before you tension it, and then tighten it after you're done tensioning. I've read that if you can turn the belt half a turn, that means it is tight enough. If it's too loose, it will rotate more than half a turn. If it's too tight, you won't be able to get it to half a turn. So that seems about right there. Also, if the belt is squeaking, tighten up the tensioner from the top. And yeah, you don't want it too tight, otherwise you'll have issues with the bearings and overheating issues and all that sort of thing inside the bearing. Okay, so now we can go ahead and connect the two plugs. As you can see here, the two plugs together. This is from the loom that we just connected before, which goes down to the AC compressor. And then we also plug in this one, which plugs into the new alternator. And then all that's left to do after that is to connect the positive terminal back on here onto the alternator, and we're done. So that's the positive there. Make sure it's tight, but not too tight. Don't want to snap it off. Cool. So it's all done now. The tension is tight. The pulley nut is tight. The nut for the positive is on. The plug's plugged into the alternator, and the battery is back on now. So it's in about 12.8 volts. We're gonna check now to see if it actually starts and runs. And charges, of course. Cool, sounds a lot better. Doesn't whine like before, the belt doesn't slip. And look at that, 14.35 volts. So it's definitely charging. I think anything above 14 volts, 14.2 volts, 14.1 volts is charging. So yeah, good result. Nissan Cefiro 2 liter V6 VQ20DE engine fixed.